Move over the Shard. There is about to be a new skyscraper in London. Henderson Global Investors has just won approval to build a London office complex nicknamed Gotham City. The 156-metre tower will cost $652 million to build and will be one of the UK's biggest office buildings with up to 34 floors. The tower is going up in the heart of London's financial district. According to the latest figures from Cushman & Wakefield, London is also sky high for rents, as Caroline Hepker reports.
Britain's newest mega tower could dominate London's skyline as soon as 2019. The complex, known as Gotham City, is apparently inspired by the Batman movies. Despite a slow recovery here in the UK, developers are ramping up. The latest figures show London is the world's most expensive city for office rentals, and that's for the second year in a row, with Hong Kong now the next most expensive town. Worldwide, office rents have increased by 3% overall in the last year. The US saw robust growth, as did the Middle East in places like Qatar and Doha, whilst office rentals remain subdued in many parts of Asia Pacific and South America. But London remains the hotspot, it seems, with limited space and even fewer new builds available. The retro-named Gotham City could be the destination for the superheroes of finance.
Our very own superhero Caroline Hepker there. So with ever smaller footprints available to build new towers, how has technology changed in order to build taller and skinnier buildings? I asked structural engineer Jane Richards of building consultancy firm WSP.
Two approaches really. You either approach it with the core of the building, so that's typically the concrete walls around your lifts, your stairs, and those sort of internal spaces, and they're usually quite central in the building naturally, so that gives us a really good starting point to put some stiffness into that sort of tall cantilever. If that's not enough, we start to look for lines where we've got natural walls coming out from the core, and we'll put walls, and we call those either outrigger walls or stem walls coming off the core. If that doesn't work, if that still isn't enough, then we can actually look at the perimeter of the building itself, the cladding, and you see buildings like Swiss Re where it's got an exoskeleton, and that's actually where the stiffness of the building is.
When you build something, clearly there is an impact on the surrounding environment, and in this particular instance I'm thinking about the flow of air, wind. That must affect everybody who's walking around the building. How do you plan for that?
You do, very much so. A tall building is an obstacle in the path for wind, so the wind will behave in a fashion that it will be rooted around that building, and it may sort of have local effects around the building features. And at pedestrian level, that has to be studied very carefully before a design goes in for its planning permission. And we will study that with the help of wind consultants. They'll model it both electronically, and they'll use physical models and put them in a wind tunnel and carry out a test on it. So they can actually measure at scale model with and see what the impact will be on the local environment.
Jane Richards explaining some of the technology involved with building tall, skinny buildings. Michelle Fleury is in New York, quite tall and skinny herself, actually. Michelle, I wonder how many wind consultants there are hanging around in New York to advise. Behind you looks as though there's plenty of potential for tall, skinny buildings.
Well, actually, Tanya, if you go to West 57th Street, that's the street that overlooks Central Park, or one of the streets that overlooks Central Park. And there's been a real rash, a race amongst developers to try and sort of build these super slender buildings. What one journalist here in New York described as a gaggle of skinny models, all sort of sprouting up, going skyward up into the sky. A lot of this is being driven by high real estate prices, which makes it valuable. Sort of, they can command enough prices to sort of make it worth trying to tackle and take on the engineering challenges which building these super skinny buildings actually pose.
And the latest figures on property prices suggest that this trend will continue?
Well, sadly not. I mean, I think when you're talking about the rarefied world of sort of, the top end of the real estate market, perhaps it will. But for the rest of the people, not so much, judging by the latest survey on housing. A look at sort of 20 metropolitan markets across the country show that actually house prices, the rate at which they've been increasing has slowed, and in fact only in 6 metropolitan areas, including San Francisco and Las Vegas, have prices, at least in December, risen from the previous month. But in most of the others, in at least 11 areas, prices are slowing down. When you compare from a year ago, they're still much better, but that pace of increase, that sort of recovery that we've seen in the US housing market, the momentum seems to be slowing somewhat.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed. And that's it from me.